Thank you, Marie and committee, for inviting me to speak, and hope you're all doing well in these very strange COVID times, if we can call it that. We really don't know what's going on. Okay, so let's get started. Today I'm going to do a little bit of a different speech from what I would normally do. Normally I've got a lot of nice drawings that my husband and other people have done to put up on screen. But today I'm going to ask you to read and think, because I've got quite a lot of slides, but most of them have just got words or teasers or phrases on them that I'm going to talk about. So you're going to be basically listening to me and looking at the words to prompt your thinking. So first of all, I'm going to give you a little rundown on the recent UFO sightings in New Zealand. It's been very, very quiet now for a good couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and that happens to be worldwide. You still get the odd sighting in amongst that, but it's been identified over many years by veteran UFO researchers that there's kind of a 7-year wave to the UFO sightings. We don't know why that is, but that's been noticed by UFO researchers worldwide, and more recently that's been confirmed by Sheryl Gottschall, who's a UFO statistics analyst in the States, who's been looking at MUFON's records and other large groups, and has noticed this 7-year wave. So really we're just at the bottom of that wave now, and we're starting to go up, so we will hopefully start to see an increase in sightings. And that's very interesting timing, considering we've got so much coming out and going on in the States at the moment. So the first sighting I talk about is actually ×3, as you can see in the writing there. This happened in Hawke's Bay, which is a very large district in the North Island. Happened quite recently, 24th of April. And a lady and her daughter were driving out of some equestrian grounds just after dark, and noticed these lights coming towards them over the paddocks. So it was airborne. It was dark, so they couldn't see an actual object or surface, but they were able to see, that's just a mock-up picture there, by the way, and they were able to see a rectangular shape outlined by the lighting configuration, which was largely red and green. It was going very, very slowly at low altitude, so no higher than the poplar treetops, which is quite low. It actually went behind some poplars. They at first didn't know what it was, stopped and watched it for some time. They then proceeded to a crossroad in the country that takes them into the city of Hastings, and they saw it going across paddocks and eventually disappearing out of sight. On the same night, at the same equestrian grounds as they were going out one gate, a lady and her children was driving in another gate. It's a big area of land, so she was about 2 k's away actually, going into the paddocks there, and she also saw it. It came quite close to her vehicle. Again, she could not see the object itself, just the lighting, very low and slow. And then a little bit later on, just further south in the country, and we're talking about a country highway that's surrounded by sheep stations, that's quite remote, just the odd farmhouse. And a lady was going along that highway to have dinner with some friends in a small rural town, and it crossed the highway in front of her very slowly, low, just above fence top height, and disappeared towards the hills. So we put this sighting into the little local newspapers in Hawke's Bay and some of the Facebook pages for those little communities to see what else would come up. And we got quite a few historic sightings coming through because of this sighting. And also it made it into the Hawke's Bay newspaper and then into the New Zealand Herald. So that was quite a good little advert for you folks NZ. The other 2 main sightings that have happened in Trentham, which is an area north of Wellington at the bottom of the North Island, and Auckland, our largest city towards the top of the North Island. And this happened, the first one in February and the second one in May. where both of these witnesses saw a dark triangular, isosceles triangular craft. So they actually saw the body of it and the shape of it, both on the outskirts of the city, and were able to see it with reflected light from the outer areas of the city where the light is not quite so bright. The first witness in February was a former policeman, and he's also been a private pilot for some 23 years and 35 years as a pilot. So we considered him a very credible witness. He has never really followed UFO stuff, so it really shook his worldview. And we must have talked for about an hour and a half about this sighting and what he could see. And he said the underside of the craft, which is very interesting, was textured in some way. And previous sightings we've had in New Zealand of black triangles, people have also described the underside of it as being faceted, almost like a piece of coal. So that was quite an interesting observation that tied in with other sightings. And really, apart from quite a number of historic sightings that have been coming in, we've had a really good 747 pilot sighting come in, but that's a historic one, it's not recent. And also we've also had sightings that go back, several years, etc., which again have shaken people's worldviews. One of those was a tourism operator in a very remote valley, beautiful part of the South Island, where he runs a small tourist company, and he saw from up on the mountaintops when he was hiking, he saw a disc come down, dropping rapidly and accelerating downwards, and disappeared into the ground. His mind was trying to tell him it was an aircraft or a helicopter falling out of the sky. He expected there to be a terrific explosion and fire. He didn't know whether to start running down the mountain and alert the local community, but it just entered the ground and disappeared. So that's a really good one that we're going to look at more closely and eventually put on our website. So that's our little spiel about the New Zealand sightings at the moment. So now we will move on to the main speech for today, which is there a plan, and whose is it? Is there a plan in terms of disclosure and what's happening at the moment? Because there are a lot of revelations coming out of the US, and they're coming out of the US from many of the organizations that we haven't trusted in the past. So we have to ask ourselves, how far are we going to be trusting towards this information now? But there are a few new players in the game and a few new faces like Luis Elizondo and a few others who've been in the news, Rubio, etc., various senators and people in positions of authority. So it's going to be an interesting little ride coming up. And at this point, I'd just like to say something about the report that is expected out in June on the 25th. I was with a group of researchers recently who had a Zoom session with Luis Elizondo, and he made it clear that this can really only be an interim report. So we are not to expect too much from it, because he said a full report at this level would take up to 2 years to produce and would involve a lot of people working together and organisations and various parts of the government, etc., working together to produce that. So we are looking for some movement from the report, perhaps, maybe a few little crumbs that might interest us. There could be a big revelation in there, but there's a lot happening at the moment, with China reporting that they are now using AI to try and track some of these objects that are in the air around their country, that are sort of drone-like, as the ones are that have been reported by the US Navy. We know that NASA has now started up a section of NASA with a new person in charge to study these UAP, as they're now called by the authorities and the military. So there's quite a lot of movement going on, and it's going to be very interesting to see how far governments like New Zealand and Australia or military are willing to move on this. Okay, so in order to take you through the other side of disclosure, because we've been hearing a lot in the news about disclosure from the States, etc., but I'd like to focus for a little while, at least in this speech, on what I have been told on craft over the years, which I put in my book. So I have got some quotes here from my book that relate to this, and some of them started way back. For example, this one in 1980, and I've put this slide up before, but we're going to go through it a little bit more in detail than I have previously with your group. So in chapter 19, disclosure of a different kind, a meeting at an undersea base in 1980, there were about 250 humans in a grandstand kind of situation with a big curved screen and a little dais up the front, on which there was standing a middle-aged human male in dark overalls, navy overalls, and a grey in a long white smock. And this was the human was in the chain of command. He was part of the organisation of this. It was not strictly ET run, but it involved us being informed about future events to a certain extent, because it was pointed out to us that if we knew too much, we would probably take action, etc. We could get ourselves into a difficult position, or we could start trying to change the course of how things go. And as we know, things need to unfold at a certain pace for mankind to be able to assimilate all of the information that's going to start coming out. And so they were talking about this to us back in 1980 when I was quite a young woman, preparing us for these events. So I just want to look at this, which was what this particular undersea base looked like. This is a bit of a back to front diagram that my husband did for Robert Salas to use in one of his speeches. And the reason I'm bringing this in here at this point and digressing for a moment is to show you that very often experiencers will come up with corroborative information. And I heard Robert speaking about an office area in an underground or undersea base where he had been taken and what he had seen, and it tied in very closely with what I had seen. So I don't know if you can see my cursor, but on the left here, the craft came through this entrance. Now, for it to come through that entrance, it had to pass out of water, out of the density of water into air. And Dr. Rudy Schild, who contributed to my book, said, we haven't learned, we don't know how to do that yet. We don't know, we would have in the undersea, in the depths of the ocean, for it to go from that pressure into air would basically crush it like a tin can or something like that. I'm no scientist. So we came into the entrance, parked around where it says our craft, and we went on a moving ramp, such as we now know at airports, etc., and some supermarkets where you're on a moving ramp, but we didn't have anything like that in New Zealand at the time. And we went up into an office area that was all glass. It was divided into specific areas with glass partitions, and that's the area which I was able to describe identically to Robert. And if you went down a corridor, you went into these lecture rooms that I was in, and there were more further on down the corridor that got more kind of rustic as you went along, where it was carved into the rock. Okay, so 1980, and the human actually stated that in the future there will be wild speculation, enthrallment, blame, fear, and a multitude of theories pertaining to the idea of contact with extraterrestrials. Now, we've probably been going through that stage for quite some time, thinking back to even in the 60s with the early contactees, there was enthrallment and a multitude of theories. So really, we're moving along the track, but we've moved along quite slowly over these decades, and now at the beginning of this decade, we're moving much more quickly. So through these slides, any words that I deem to be a bit important, I'm putting in yellow for you to look at. So really we're looking at some of those words there, like blame and fear and wild speculation. At the moment, there's not a lot of blame or fear, but we don't know what kind of reaction may come from sectors of society if eventually the pronouncement was made that it's real, they're here, they're amongst us. And I can imagine that there would be sectors of society that would not take too kindly to that. And these are the kinds of things that we need to be prepared to deal with in the future. He anticipated a time in the future when the work that has been carried out between the two species, humans and extraterrestrials, can be revealed to the public. But this eventual disclosure will be dependent upon mankind's readiness and receptiveness. And that's a very important point, because right throughout the decades, people like myself and many others who have these kinds of recollections of contact and lectures on craft or underground or wherever, have seen the two species working together, humans and extraterrestrials. Some have seen it in a positive sense, as I have. Others have seen negative things taking place. I can't speak for that because I haven't experienced it. But it shows that a great deal of care and planning has been put into this. So I say to people, this process is something that can't be hurried, and it is a process. It isn't something that you just suddenly put out in the news, on TV or whatever. It is a process of leading humanity towards a certain point of readiness and receptiveness. And this has involved decades of sci-fi and movies and adverts and things that familiarize us with the concept of extraterrestrials or UFOs or life beyond this planet. And maybe we're very, very close to the point now where mankind can assimilate this. And as I've said before, we often say in the UFO fraternity that we're ready for it, but then we are a very small part of the total world population, and there are plenty that aren't. Okay, he warned there will be groups and individuals who will latch onto the idea of an extraterrestrial presence and will seek to create a fear factor around it. And much of our work in the future will be around defusing that fear. Well, we're certainly seeing that creeping in at the moment. We're hearing the word threat a lot. Well, yes, there is the potential for a threat. We can't ignore that, but nor do we want the entire process to swing towards public fear factor, and everyone believing that anything that's coming and visiting our planet is a threat to us and something to be feared. And it's very important for those of you who may be listening who've had contact or who work in a group such as your own, that much of our work in the future, and remember this was 1980, will be around defusing that fear. So groups such as your own, which provides a service to the community in that you have speakers and you discuss things about not just the UFO field, but other aspects of our lives that we need to be aware of and be paying attention to. This is really important in diffusing fear, and not just fear of an extraterrestrial presence, but fear of other things as well. Powerful negative dogmas and theories will arise about contact with the visitors, and conversely, there will be pro-alien cults and organisations, some of which may ultimately be equally as damaging to the prospect of humanity's acceptance of an extraterrestrial presence. Now, that's quite interesting, because if we look back at the contactee times, there were a lot of dogmas and theories that arose around that, almost like a cult-like status for some of those early contactees. And that's not necessarily their doing. It's just that at that time, such accounts of contact were so extraordinary that people were enthusiastic. They wanted to learn more. They wanted to know about it. And often the contactees found themselves put on some kind of pedestal in a cult-like status. back in the 60s and 60s, we had George Adamski come to New Zealand, and there were George Adamski discussion groups right around New Zealand, and he was treated like a king, you know, brought to New Zealand and treated as if he was, you know, a cult figure and a cult leader. And that's the sort of thing that may happen if we start revealing more through disclosure, and more information comes out about what is in our skies and what is happening. Pro-alien cults and organisations can also arise from public speakers on a subject, and through no fault of their own, I'm sure, but there are some prominent speakers in the UFO field who have almost reached cult-like status, in that their every word people listen to and take as gospel. But what we have to do is use our own critical thinking and use our intuition, because not everything that they say is correct. Much of it is speculative, but often people don't think deeply enough to realise that. On another occasion, some 7 years later, in 1987, I was taken on board a craft where I met with a senior grey scientist. Now, this entity took me into an area where there was genetic manipulation going on, if you can put it that way, or genetic creation. So there were these enormous tubes, big round cylinders of glass or perspex-like material that you could see into, and there were all of these different species being created there, and I was told what they would do with them and why they were creating them, and it all made perfect sense to me. So they were talking about seeding planets, which is the name of that particular chapter that I wrote about this. So they were creating life forms utilizing genes that they had from elsewhere, combined with some perhaps from our planet, and they were putting them onto newly developing planets. And we often wonder about our own history and where we came from, and did this actually happen to us? On this occasion, he discussed other things with me as well. Once we'd walked around and had a look at that, we discussed the future on this planet. He expressed concern about our potentially destructive course of development and outlined future situations on our planet which will cause many humans' lives to implode. Now, we do see, as a natural course of event on this planet, natural disasters happen. And of course, there are other things that have happened, like the Twin Towers collapse and huge loss of life through a variety of means right around the world. But he was really talking about something in a much broader sense, where this was much more widespread on the planet, and that has had me intrigued in a concerned way for decades now, since 1987, about what could cause this. And I began looking very closely at things that were happening on the planet as I got older. He said widespread chaos will eventually cause people to become insular and concerned only with their day-to-day survival. This will create what he referred to as a dead stage on the planet, as focus becomes confined and self-centered rather than global. Now, this is an interesting one too, because at this point in time, over the last few years, we have been seeing widespread chaos throughout the planet. And I've been shown on another occasion on board craft images of this widespread chaos, where there are people fighting in the streets, there's fires, buildings are on fire, cars are on fire, people are dying, thousands of people protesting. Well, we're seeing a lot of this happening at the moment. More so, I think, than in previous decades. There have been isolated incidents around the world. I think of apartheid, where there were huge demonstrations in New Zealand, huge things happening in South Africa at that time. but those are minuscule in terms of the world stage. He was really talking about the world stage, and really that is probably more akin to what is happening to us at present. And he referred to this dead stage on the planet. Now, he wasn't meaning that we're all going to die, or, you know, plants are going to die and animals. He was just using that expression where everything becomes dampened down, everything becomes still, everything becomes, I can't move this way or that, we can't do this or that. And really, with what has been happening with COVID, I'm starting to think, is this the dead stage on the planet, where everything becomes confined and self-centered? So everyone's rushing out buying toilet paper, for example, self-centered rather than global. We're concerned about what is happening in our backyard and our country and our community and our household, rather than thinking of what's happening in the rest of the world. We've got our head down looking after ourselves. I don't think we've really reached that point of dead stage on the planet yet, but we could be heading that way. Looking at the moment, we've got a virulent form of bird flu that is now reared up in China, and some specialists are saying this could be the beginning of another pandemic right under our nose. We don't know. Is what we're going through now even a pandemic in the true sense of the word? These are the questions that I know that your group is discussing, but which we all need to be thinking about. Okay, so he said the human psyche will experience global despondency. The human psyche, that means us as a mass consciousness, will experience global despondency, and people will be at a loss to know where to go, spiritually, physically, and geographically, or where to turn for assistance and guidance. I've put this slide up before when I've spoken at UFO over the last couple of years, because in 2015, when I'd spoken in the UK and Scandinavia, my husband and I were coming down through Italy, and at that time we saw all of the influx of immigrants coming from Africa and North Africa up, landing in Italy and other countries like Greece, and coming up through Italy. So there was this massive surge, trooping of people through various countries trying to find somewhere to go physically, geographically, spiritually. But this wasn't the only place. Not long after that, we had the same procession of lost souls coming up from Ecuador and up through South America, heading towards the States. And there have been other areas of the planet where this cavalcade of people looking for somewhere to go has been happening. And there's a multitude of reasons why this is occurring. But at the moment, it has caused a global despondency for quite some time, because some countries have been overwhelmed by this. Some countries have changed basically their whole lifestyle because of this. And we don't know where this is going to end and how it's going to turn out. We will need to become aware of overlaying agendas, humans against humans, humans harming humans on a near global scale. Now, this is, when he said this to me, this was quite a wake-up call. We meaning experiencers, but I think it really applies to all of humanity. Becoming aware of overlaying agendas. And if we look at this whole disclosure procession that's happening in the States at the moment, with one thing after another coming out, and then someone contradicts something that's come out, or they dampen it down a little bit, they make it sound not so serious, then they put out something else. There are overlaying agendas, and we don't know which is the truth, what is the truth anymore. So we have to become very analytical, very critical thinking, and we need to step back before opening our mouths and voicing opinions, We have to really do our homework, and I know your group certainly is in many ways. But the bit at the bottom, the 2 lines at the bottom, for me were the real ones to be concerned about. Humans harming humans. Humans against humans. Well, that has always been the case on this planet. It's in our nature to fight each other and to be aggressive and, to gain control. It's a negative side of human nature. But those bottom 2 lines in yellow, humans harming humans on a near global scale. I have been waiting years now, watching what is happening in the world and waiting for something that looks like that. Because all you can do is look at what's happening and try to fit that to that description. And at the moment, we have got a pandemic going on, they tell us. We have got people who've died worldwide, which is a tragedy. And the result of that is now there is a near global push for us all to be vaccinated. Is this a situation that this Gray was talking about, where we are harming each other through a vaccination program? Is the vaccination a good thing? I am not anti-vaccination, but nor am I pro-vaccination. I am pro, let's do it properly, get it right, test it, and not use humans as guinea pigs. And we have no way of knowing at present as to whether that is happening. So humans harming humans on a near global scale, we're talking about some huge thing that is applicable right around the globe. And up to this point, I cannot think of anything that fits that. Yes, we have wars happening here, there, and everywhere. Yes, we have pharmaceutical companies that the products of which harm some humans but not others. But this was an event or a situation he was referring to which he was not willing to extrapolate on at that time, which was global. So if in the future you really start thinking about this, think about that sentence, humans harming humans on a near global scale. He also said that the way we, and he was talking about experiencers at that time, perceive and convey information is often different from others, and this key difference will become increasingly relevant and crucial in the future during a time of global despondency. Is this the time of global despondency? And is the way that experiencers perceive things and convey information relevant and crucial at this time? That's a difficult one, because often it is very difficult for experiencers to talk about their thoughts and feelings. Often we're the afterthought on many conference schedules. Often scientists ignore what we have to say because they consider it to be unscientific and not testable. But certainly I think that experiencers do perceive things differently, and they do convey it differently. And I think that will become more relevant as time goes by, because it's all very well to be talking about disclosure, but what follows the disclosure? Contact eventually follows disclosure, is likely to follow at some time in our future. If the programs I have been taught about by the ETs is going to come into fruition, then definitely the relevance of experiencers will come to the fore at some time. However, their hope is that this will be followed, the situation of global despondency will be followed by a slow upswing of recovery and forward momentum again. There will be a deeper examination of the possibility of life elsewhere. Well, I have heard quite a few things said by the ETs over the years about what might happen when this is examined. because there will be sectors of society who will not want to accept it and will fight against it and rail against it. And so there will be a period of difficulty and examination before any forward momentum and recovery comes to the fore. Now, a year later in 1988, I was taken on board a rectangular craft, obviously similar to what the people in Hawke's Bay saw. And we were given a lecture by what I refer to as a grey elder. So I was told that he was like the rootstock of their civilization, or the echelon of beings who look like him are like the rootstock, if I can put it that way, from which everything else springs. From that, I understood that their genes are utilized in the creation of various hybrid forms of their species. And during this speech, he proposed that in the future, there will be much confusion and speculation as the realization emerges that extraterrestrial races are actually here. But he gave a warning with this. As the issue of contact with other universal species is examined more deeply by the public, people who have had contact already may be scrutinized for their knowledge of and association with these species. So there's a little danger warning there, and we can see already, I have talked to your group before about how an attempt was made on my life in 2018 when I spoke at the UFO Congress, and I was very ill for about nearly a year afterwards. But other experiencers have had this kind of thing happen to them as well, as have scientists. So if they want to silence us, they will scrutinize us. So when the time comes of great examination, which is the term the ETs used, into this reality, and the fact that they are here and would like to make contact with us, people who've already had that contact will be scrutinized. And they actually showed us in our consciousness, if I can put it that way, they put it out there so that we all registered it in our minds. We saw actually people being abused and chased and excluded because they had gone public or were known to have talked about their experiences. And I see a lot of people today claiming to have had experiences for the flimsiest of reasons. And when I've traveled to 8 or 9 different countries now and talked to many, many experiencers. And when I ask, they say, I've had contact experiences, and I ask them to tell me about it. What they can tell me is minimal. So any memory they have is minimal. If people have minimal memory, it might be quite a good idea just to investigate that quietly and wait and see what eventuates in your life before you shout it from the rooftops. Because the first thing that some groups might do, if the disclosure came out that it is a reality and they're here, is that they may try to take down the sectors of the UFO community who claim to have had contact, because we will be seen by many as the enemy. Likewise, he said, people who claim to have had contact, or I'm saying this, contact with them, the ETs, but who are not telling the truth, will eventually be exposed and suffer for this. He added that it is sad but true that human nature is sometimes attracted to opportunities for ego gratification or exploitation. And we must have all seen this over the years, where the subject really, due to the nature of it, is ripe for exploitation. And we do see that happen, sadly. But some people who've made a lot of claims that are actually not true and have been riding on a wave of popularity because of that, may suffer for that. That's just a warning there that came from the ETs. An unfolding process of scientific discoveries must take place first in order to lead mankind towards acceptance of these advanced concepts of energy. Now, in this case, I've put a note there for myself, example, to give you an example. Some years ago, I was on board a craft, and they were developing forms of healing technology that we would use in the future. So I've talked before about how some of these technologies and methods and computers they've been developing are like a halfway technology or a bridging technology that can go from where their technology is in terms of physics to reach our understanding. The jump is far too far. It would take us a very long time probably to make that jump. It may have taken them hundreds or thousands of years. So what they've been trying to do is bring something in the middle here that they've tested out on a lot of experiencers. And in my book, I've written two chapters called The Test, where I described this testing that was going on with this kind of technology. And the thing that's missing in the technology that we're coming out with now, much of which I used in the past decades before mankind ever invented it, such as swipe screens, rollable screens, flexible technology, 3D imagery, etc., which I was using back in the 70s and 80s before mankind had ever brought this out into our own technology. So there's an unfolding process that has taken, and they have led scientists into the discovery of these things in many cases. This isn't to say that humanity is not clever enough to do this ourselves. Of course we are. But at the same time, on board craft, I have seen groups of scientists taken on in an altered state, so they're not frightened and they don't really know what's going on, but they are absorbing the information packages that are being put in their heads, and they then go away. Presumably these packages come out in their work, and some of these inventions come into reality in our technology. Now, on this occasion where I was part of a testing or trial of a healing technology, it involved using light and tracking emotions in the body. And I'm not going to say too much about it because it's going in my second book, but they had several consoles in a semicircle, and I stood up in front of a white screen-like thing. I think it was just a background. And they were able, from these different consoles with entities standing at them, they were able to track, using energy that we don't even understand, they were able to track emotions that had occurred from my moment of birth right through to the age I was at the time, in my 30s. And they were able to track where those emotions had gone in the body, where they'd been stored, if I can put it that way. Now, this is, we talk about cellular memory. So this is the kind of thing we're talking about, where an emotion, a strong emotion that's happened over a period of time to a certain event, has stored in the body, created damage, created disease or whatever, and they were able to track this. And while tracking it, they were using light directed at it to correct some of it, not all of it, but they were sending bands of light of different colors. They were sending strands that were as fine as a hair, just depending, they did an analysis, and depending on how bad the problem was and where it was lodged, this was all done with directed light. So I'm expecting that sometime in the future, this kind of technology will come out. Okay, he insisted the human race was not yet ready at this time to accept this information and technology, nor responsible enough to use the information with integrity and right application. Well, are we even ready for that now? That was way back in the 80s. And since that time, I don't think we've progressed that far. They have since talked about, to groups that I've been a part of on craft, they've talked about our backward spirituality, how it is just going backwards. And if we look at the way people behave today in large groups, in large crowds and individuals, it's very much about look after yourself and not look after your neighbour or humanity. Of course, there are plenty of people who are not like that at all, but we do see an overabundance of this, especially on our television screens. But right application means taking their technology, if it was given to us, and using it for the benefit of mankind. We don't know, for sure, whether there have been downed craft that have been back engineered and that technology has then been developed. We are getting snippets of information coming out of the States that, yes, they have got some material from craft, yes, they've got some technology they're studying, but we don't have absolute proof of that yet. So what they're saying is that we've still got a way to go before we can prove to them that we have integrity and we will use right application of their technology. So they can allow certain things through to us, like computers, etc., various kinds of screens, various other technologies in the medical field that are starting to come to the fore that I've talked to you about in previous speeches. Some of the technology that I've seen that decades ago that's now coming to fruition in our technology. They can introduce that kind of benign technology, but if they introduce technology that we could utilize to become more powerful, for a country to be more powerful over others, to harm humans for our benefit, if I can put it that way, then they still have, and rightly so, concerns about our right application. So I'm going to move on to the next section now. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Is ET in control of the developing UFO UAP sighting agenda? So far in the UFO field of research, we've seen this pulling apart, if I can put it that way, of the sightings arena and the contact arena. And for years I have been saying actually they belong together, because as a sighting investigator, I know that often people will report a sighting and then some weeks later they'll come to you and say, actually, I've got a bit more I want to tell you. And you say, oh, yes, have you remembered some more details? And I actually say, well, actually, I think this contact happened, or I saw an entity, etc. So they've always been side by side. But, you know, some researchers have been instrumental in pulling them apart and keeping them apart, because there's been a benefit through that. And I think now we're going to see them coming back together again. And is ET in control of the developing sighting agenda that's happening with all the UAP and the reports from the military? I'm quite sure that they are. This is all part of the unfolding disclosure, and we may think that we are in control, but heck, any experiencer who's stood in front of a overpowering and powerful ET on a craft is going to tell you, no, we're not in control. We are being controlled, if I can put it that way, in a positive sense. We are being moved along a track because we've become a danger to ourselves. We've become a danger to them with our nuclear proficiency, and they don't want anything happening on this planet that is going to affect other civilizations out there through electromagnetic fields and frequencies and energies going out through space that we do not even understand yet, but they do. So in 1980, again, I was, I'm just going to check the time. Okay. I was taken onto a craft where we were told this is a planned agenda. The whole sighting thing re-emerging at this time is planned. It has been planned a long time. And it is eventually creating a turning point whereby mankind will no longer be able to explain away all anomalous lights or objects in the sky. Is that what's happening now? I think so. And we were told sightings of their craft will increase. But significantly, members of the public will begin to encounter not only the craft, but also glimpses of the occupants. Now, this is happening very slowly. People will say, oh, there haven't been many sightings lately, but take into account that 7-year wave cycle that I talked about earlier on. Take that into account. Look at the whole global situation, not just what comes out of the States, which tends to dominate the UFO field. But sightings are slowly going to start increasing. And at this point in time, we're now hearing what the military has been sighting. And some of those are very recent. And it's not only happening in the States, it's happening elsewhere. Other countries are going to come forward sooner or later with what their military personnel have been seen as well. This in turn is going to give the public permission in some way to talk about their experiences. It's going to make people feel safer to talk about what they have seen. And certainly if I look at New Zealand sightings over the last 8 years, this has been happening in New Zealand. So we've had a number of people who've talked to us about their sightings, and they've glimpsed the occupants. They've seen them outside the craft. They've seen them at windows. So, for example, we had a neuroscientist in New Zealand who was fishing off some rocks late at night, and he became aware of some glowing eyes, if I can put it that way. They may have been eye covers, they may have been lights moving around. And to his astonishment, they levitated or floated up the cliff and disappeared. And then he saw this object light up with bright lights in a particular configuration, silently lift off, move past him, go 300 meters or so out to sea in front of him, and basically hung in the sky looking at him. And he got a bit shaken after a while and decided the fishing was no good that night and he was leaving. So he threw his bag together and took off. But these are the kinds of sightings where that are being reported worldwide, where people are seeing something other than an object or a light in the sky. Other incidents and events will occur that will trigger human consciousness. True logic will eventually prevail and people will begin to accept the reality of extraterrestrial visitation. If we go back, this is 1980, and they're talking about what will happen in the future. So, so really looking at what's coming out of the States at the moment and some other countries, this is the point we're at now. China is saying they have had incursions into their airspace, seeing things on television. These objects, the Navy footage, etc., is triggering people's consciousness. People are contacting me and saying, I had a sighting in the 60s. I had a sighting in the 70s. I want to talk about it now, because they're seeing that it's okay, as I said before, to do this. And I like the bit here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Third line down, true logic will eventually prevail. So we're waiting now for a report to come out, which may turn out to be just an interim report. But if we start examining this in a logical sense, and there is an allowance made for us, for humanity to do that, and that has to come from the top, that has to come from military and governments, because they are the ones who are going to be supplying this kind of information, then people will slowly begin to look at the logic. And this time of examination that I mentioned before that the ETs have talked about, this great time of examination, is just beginning. Now let's move on in the last part of the speech, just looking at the time, to some experiencers' concerns. Because, you know, I get dozens of emails and messages every month from experiencers around the world, and some of them are wanting to talk about their experiences and see if I know of any corroborative experiences from other people. But many of them are expressing their concerns and their frustrations of what is happening in the world at the moment. And the experiencers are feeling at this point in time that they don't really have an avenue to go down in terms of contact. They don't have the platform to make their feelings and thoughts known. Of course, there are podcasts and Zoom speeches and that on YouTube, but it's not something that an experiencer feels safe talking about in their own community, and sometimes not even in their own family. We will reach that point eventually, but at the moment, a lot of people are feeling stifled about this. And so some advice that the ETs gave at one stage is beware of false narratives affecting the way people think. Mistaken ways of thinking, in other words. So if we look out there at what is on YouTube and on Facebook, etc., we see a lot of false narratives out there, and it's very misleading for people who are new to the subject. They can't sort it out. So I also think that there are some experiencers who are coming into their own, who are realizing that they've had experiences, having flashbacks and memories of experiences, reading through records they've kept of their dreams and are now seeing them in a different light and analysing them. And they're realising that they have been misled some of the time by mistaken ways of thinking. And really it's up to us as individuals to examine things critically, as I've already said, and take from what people are saying what feels right to us, but don't take it on board if it doesn't, because it can lead you down a bad path. Now, this is a quote from Keith Basterfield, one of your researchers in Australia. And Keith wrote this to me in an email some years ago and has given me permission to quote it. And I think this is a really great statement that Keith made. Some researchers are creating the field rather than researching it. Now, I found this to be so truthful and so relevant and so deeply touching for me as both an experiencer and a researcher that I thought about this deeply, and I wrote an article about it, which was published in the UK in Gary Hesseltine's UFO Truth magazine, about integrity in the contact field. Because some researchers, I believe, have been creating the field. And by that, he meant that they have been putting information out there which was advantageous to them, but not necessarily advantageous at all to the very people that they purported to be serving, and that is experiencers, contactees, abductees. And I think a lot of people have been led down garden paths by competing researchers. And I have seen this over the years in speaking at conferences in different parts of the world. We see people who are competing, who have to have the best speech or the most sensational thing to put in their speech or whatever. So they've been creating the field, creating the data, creating the conversation, rather than researching it, rather than looking at what experiences are really saying and analysing and researching that. Very often interpretations have been made by researchers, and speculation has been made, and then it is delivered in a sense that is realistic, that is factual, that is gospel, and how you deliver it and make it sound good and professional and definite and strong and powerful, people believe it. And one of the things that I do through Communicator Link is talk to experiencers who've had bad experiences, not only with researchers talking to them, because I've had some bad ones myself, not just with researchers talking to them, but regressions where when they learn a little bit more, they feel that they've been hard done by and that they don't feel happy about what took place at all. So this is a very important area of contact to me. Integrity in the field and ethics means everything to me. Confidentiality, respecting people's material, and being truthful. And if you don't know something, don't make it up. You say, I don't know, but I'll research it. Are people who are spreading disinformation being protected and promoted? Now, this is a question that has come up. I've put it in here because this has come up at a lot of conferences that I have been to, where, you know, the same old argy-bargy happens in the UFO field where people are pointing fingers, etc. But, you know, sometimes you wonder if disinformation that is being spread, those people never seem to, even if people are able to prove it's disinformation, they don't come to any harm. They're still being invited to conferences. They are still promoting themselves. They still have a huge following of people, even though sometimes their information has been proved to be completely incorrect. There's been no retraction by them. There's been no apology by them. And so you have to start wondering, why are they still operating? And I think, for example, of myself and a number of other experiencers and abductees I know who've actually been harmed and hurt and threatened and injured. There's quite a number of experiencers and ones who've gone public who, with their experiences, who've experienced this. So, for example, using what happened to me at the Congress, where I nearly died when I got back to New Zealand because of what I'd been infected with, I was talking about alien technology. But I see, you know, people from various groups and representatives who've been in the news in the recent few years, since 2017, for example, in the States, who are talking about technology, who are making claims about in the media about technology, but nothing's happening to them. So, you know, you have to wonder, why is it? Why? And I'm still asking myself this, and I don't have an answer yet. Why is it that experiencers who talk about these things are threatened and injured? And it's happened to quite a number of us. And at the moment, information capsules are surfacing en masse. And by that I mean that people who have, over the years, experiencers, abductees who've been given these information capsules about what they're to do in the future, what they may need to do, how they need to go about it. This is all surfacing. So people are contacting people like myself and others who work in this field and talking about this information that they've got that's just suddenly opened up in their mind. And they are sometimes having memories about when it was put in there, how it was put in there, and who and what was present at the time. The more this happens, the more people are going to feel safe to come out and talk about it. So we have the three waves that I've talked about previously, three waves of souls who've incarnated on the planet at this time to serve different purposes and to undertake certain tasks. And the second wave are basically in my age group, a bit younger, a bit older. And we are a finite group. We are not still coming into the planet like the first and third waves. We're a finite group. We are the abductees and experiencers and contactees. And a lot of those people who've been sitting dormant for years, if I can put it that way, they've kind of been put to sleep by the ETs so that they are not going to wake up until a crucial time. And we are seeing so many of these second wavers coming up, talking about these information capsules, talking about memories emerging and coming forward in increasing numbers. This being the case, support systems are needed because some of them are very disturbed by what they recall. They've been having this quite normal life for a long time, and then suddenly they're having these kinds of memories rising up. So there needs to be support from people who've already been through that stage of development. They also maybe need to be qualified therapists to work with them if they want to have that kind of therapy, counselling or hypnotherapy. But I would urge people to ensure that whoever you go to is qualified. And I don't mean a weekend course where you get a certificate. I mean a proper formal qualification where you can show the person your certificate and the fact that you are registered and that you have an umbrella organisation that you are answerable to. Because I'm getting a lot of experiencers come to me who've had a bad experience going to someone who's not qualified, who's made claims about their qualifications and experience that is not correct and not true, and they feel hard done by, and they no longer trust anything that emerged from those discussions, etc., and they're really concerned about that. But at the same time, many current public experiencers are falling silent, opting out, and joining activist and environmental groups. So what is it I'm talking about here by public experiencers? Well, I'm not going to name any names, but I have quite a largish group of experiencers that I trust with my life, that I communicate with worldwide. Many of them have gone public, have spoken at conferences, have written books, have somehow or other utilised their experiences in life. They are now falling silent. They are opting out. Many of them don't even want to be here anymore. They don't want to be public anymore. They've had enough. And instead they are turning their energies towards activist groups, environmental groups, serving the environment and Mother Earth, because this is where they see our biggest danger and our biggest problem arising in the future is, as I have talked about before, massive earth changes. Many of these experiencers have gone public about what they have seen on board craft, what they've been shown is likely to happen in the future, as I have been shown, and they don't want to discuss it anymore. On the flip side of the coin, I know some who went public many years ago, for example, along with Dr. John Mack, and they are now coming out of seclusion, and they're so concerned about our future and what's happening that they are now going public again and expressing those concerns. I've had experiencers call me in New Zealand in the middle of the night, 2 in the morning, in tears. I'm remembering what I was shown on the craft. Humanity does not realise what lies ahead. And not wishing to sound like all doom and gloom, but there's a certain sector of the contact fraternity worldwide who are saying it's all love and light, we're going to ascend and we're going to go to a new earth. That may well happen one day. But the rest of us have been told that actually we have to go through hell before we get there. And much of that will be earth changes. So that's something for you to think about and chew on. So again, in the future, there'll be wild speculation, enthrallment, blame, fear, and a multitude of theories pertaining to the idea of contact with the visitors. And we were advised on the craft not to get caught up in this hype, not to get attached to hype or anything that projects hype. We should strive to work independently or with like-minded people, many of whom will be brought to us one way or another. And if I look back and using my own life as an experience, I've always tried to work independently. Yes, I have my own organisation in New Zealand with a small group of volunteers, but broadly speaking, I've worked independently and I've thought independently. I have not aligned myself to large groups or followings. I've always sought out like-minded people for discussion. And I've always found that right when I needed some help or needed some assistance or input, someone drops in front of me. And a perfect example of that is Dr. Rudy Schild, who contributed to my book. Another example is my right-hand man in Ufocus NZ and friend of 20 years, the late Graham Opie, who came out of nowhere because he had a sighting that he reported back in the 90s. And I went to visit him and interview him. And there began our 20-year relationship as friends and workers in Ufocus NZ, like-minded person who dropped in front of me for a reason. And when I look back, I can just list and tick off the reasons why Graham came into my life at that time. So I think we all have to trust that if we're wondering what our task in life is, and if we're wondering what we're supposed to do to help mankind at this time, we put it out there. We lead a good life. We think critically. We examine. We try to be positive. We do things that are of great value to the planet. And we wait for things to drop in front of us because we're cogs in a wheel. And when the time is right, our cog will start turning and it will link up with another one. And that's how it goes. And this is me talking in 1989 when we were being given information about how the ETs and the humans who've been working with them for decades on these agendas and on these outcomes have put people in place right across societies worldwide. And so this is me saying I understand, or I was told, that they are trained and they are integrated right across societies worldwide, forming a societal framework upon which contact can rest. So when the time comes for things to come out worldwide, yes, there'll be a huge amount of examination. Yes, there'll be lots of discussion. Yes, there might be some bad things happen and some negative things happen. But there are these people trained by a combination of ETs and humans for decades who are spread right across the world. And that's when they spring into action. They've been getting into certain positions, and that's where their task will begin in earnest. And it is upon this organisation and this framework of people who will come to the fore that this form of contact that may take place in the future will rest. And they have said in 2010 on an onboard craft experience, through this process of education, mass consciousness can be influenced positively. A massive shift in humanity's awareness can result from this intervention. So the process of education they're talking about is the agenda that I outline in my book. It's the multi-leveled education programs that they have been utilising for humans, taking millions of people on board craft over the decades, training them, informing them whether they remember it or not. It's going to come out in their subconscious in their day-to-day life anyway. It's a positive agenda that I describe. Other people describe other agendas. I can only speak about what I have experienced. And a massive shift in humanity's awareness can result from this kind of intervention. And they described it as change from within. So they're assisting us to change from within. They are not exerting and enforcing change on us, coming in like a takeover group. They are training us, informing us, teaching us a better way, better information, better ways of doing things, so that this shift will come from within humanity. And hopefully, because of that, it will last and take fruition. Okay, so just put that up. That's my book. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's available on Amazon. So I'm willing to ask some questions now.
Let's open it up now then for Q&A. Anyone have a question? Hey, by the way, that was fantastic. We all really enjoyed that, Suzy. That was a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions?
No, they know everything.
Here's one.
Thank you for the presentation. It's fantastic. There's a lot of talk about med beds coming into our near future. A near future could be years away. It's also sort of meant to be an esoteric sort of healing process. Are we thinking about this on the same lines as what the explanation would be? Or do you think it's all under the same umbrella?
I just missed the last part of the question.
Are med beds and your explanation of the light shining, particularly in emotive parts of our body, is that all under the same umbrella, the same healing process as a med bed?
Yes. I did a speech to you for, I think it was 2018, I think. I'll just have a drink, hang on. 2018 or 2019, it'll be on your website probably, about the technology that I have witnessed, and a lot of that was medical technologies, various forms of scanning that could see inside your body, which we are only just beginning to develop now. So all of these things that they test out and they use on experiencers on a craft, and they you give feedback and you can talk about, talk to them about it. It's not like they do things and they're not willing to talk about it. Certainly not the species that I've had contact with anyway. But a number of the chapters in my book, I talk about these beds. I didn't call them med beds. That's a recent term that someone else has used. But for example, in one of the chapters, I describe a bed that because I didn't have any other reference point to describe it when I was writing the book, I said that the base of it was like an armadillo's back. You know how an armadillo has that armor and it can roll itself up into a ball? Well, the med bed had the bottom that was like that, so it could go into different shapes, and it could roll up. It could accommodate all different kinds of forms and bodies, put it that way. But it could also do a whole variety of things. So yes, the use of the color therapy is all part of the kind of technology they've been developing for us, and much of this has filtered down, I think, or been back engineered or obtained in some way through cooperation, and we're seeing it coming out now because the likeness of our technology that's coming out now, the likeness to what I've seen on board craft is phenomenal, but there are aspects of it we're struggling with. And the main aspect we struggle with all of this healing technology is the use of consciousness. Not only the consciousness of the person who's on the healing apparatus, but the consciousness of the ETs working with you, doing the healing or doing the operation of the apparatus. And so this is this missing link. We are only just beginning to use thought, for example, to be able to move a cursor on a screen, and people who tetraplegics and paraplegics are able to operate a computer with their mind. But this often involves attaching electrodes and all of that sort of thing to register brain waves, etc. We do not yet have that instant link of consciousness. And I describe also in my book a chapter on flying a craft, and this was a perfect example of the instant use of consciousness, because it bypasses all of the mechanics of the body, the need for the brain to transfer messages to muscles and ligaments and tendons, etc., to make the arm move, to make the arm, you know, pull a joystick or something. It is instant connection between the consciousness and the craft. And this is the same with these medical procedures on craft, these medical apparatus and technology, where you link your consciousness in to the apparatus, and that's how it is able to operate with you. So it's like you become a part of that technology in some way. And that's the difference between our technology at present and what they can offer us and what we're trying to develop.
Thank you, that's brilliant. Do we have a timeline?
Well, as I've said before, that they described the timeline as being like a rubber band. Now, that's an odd thing for an extraterrestrial to say, but they go into your mind, they pick out a terminology or an example, a parable that you understand, and they use it to explain to you. So he went into my mind and he found a rubber band that can stretch. The image of that and understanding of that in my mind. And so he said the timeline for what we're going through on the planet is like a rubber band. So some days it can pull out and it's really doing well. We've advanced all the way out here from the starting point and we're doing well. But the next day we might be back here again because there's a war going on or something terrible has happened in the world on a global scale or in a particular country. So we're going like this. Our mass consciousness is not consistent. And they have talked to us about how we are very fickle compared to them, compared to their composure and their analytical skills and their ability to separate emotion from analysis. We aren't like that. We get it all jumbled up and tied together and we act on emotions, etc. So it's very difficult for them to work on a timeline with us. The timeline really depends on our development of our spirituality and our compassion on this planet. Everything is reliant on that at this point in time.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, here's another question down the front.
Hello, Suzanne. Thank you for your information. I've been aware of a healing modality using the voice and frequency to determine what is your issues health-wise, which was started by Sheryl Edwards in America, and it's now in apps that you can buy called Genius Biofeedback and a few other things. Is that kind of frequency healing also part of some of the work that you've experienced in your...
I'm sorry, but I'm having real trouble hearing what you're saying. It's really rumbly and muffled.
Can you
Can
hear me now?
I can, but it's very muffled.
Is it because I'm sitting under the aircon?
You may want to come, if you just come closer to the microphones on the actual camera.
Okay.
Actually,
Is that better?
yep, sure.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Sheryl Edwards in America, who's been working on the voice and hearing the voice that determines through frequency particular health issues in a person, which then she can feed back frequencies to help heal you. This is now being developed into a thing called Genius Biofeedback. And I'm just wondering if that is also part of the technology that you're aware of that we've used and adopted.
I'm not aware of that on the craft, but I will say that because the ETs don't generally vocalize, they use telepathy and consciousness in general. But they have said that they have taught many experiencers to express multiple concepts through their voice, and we don't even realize we're doing it. So, for example, how can I couch this? They have an ability to telepathically do what I describe in my book as a telepathic spray. That's something I named as a child, where they can look at an audience such as yourself and they can select 3 or 4 people who need a little bit of information. They can tell by telepathic means that you've missed some of the information that's been conveyed to you or that you've seen on a screen. And so they just fill in the gaps for you. And one entity can stand up the front and send out 4 or 5 telepathic messages simultaneously. Now, do not ask me how they can do that, because we're not ventriloquists. We can't produce 4 voices at once for 4 different people to listen to, but they are able to do that through consciousness. So what they've taught some experiencers to do is to express things in a way using your voice and the way you express it. And there's an emotional component there. There's a vocal component. There's a consciousness component. There's a private thinking component that's going on where you're thinking as you're expressing. And these combined, they have said, will unlock things in people's minds. So maybe in the future, or even now, when experiencers speak, for some people who may be listening to them, who have a little information package waiting to open, that frequency that the experiencer is expressing through different ways will unlock that frequency, boing. And I've had people come up to me, get up and walk out crying while I'm speaking, and come back later and apologize and say, when you said this word or when you said that phrase, it just completely blew me away. It was all this stuff opened up, all this emotions. I had to leave the room. Can I talk to you about it? So to me, this is evidence of that happening. And I'm not saying that public speakers don't do that anyway, because many public speakers know how to key in and lock on to the group consciousness, put it that way. But this is just something that's designed for other experiencers and for people who need something at that point in time. So yes, the voice is important, but I have not heard of it being used on craft in a healing modality.
Maybe it's because this particular machine does mental, spiritual, emotional and physical diagnosis. So possibly because we can't do it telepathically through the frequency of the voice, which is a vibration, it's actually doing it in that method.
Yes, and I guess that's what I'm talking about. I'm just not calling it healing, but I guess for some people it is a healing experience, having something emerge and being able to talk about it and release it. That's probably a healing experience, but as in terms of physical healing, that's different.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, there's one. Likely suspect.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the presentation, Susan. I've just got a question. So the people, the entities that you've been talking or sort of receiving information from, I'm assuming they're mostly greys, is that right?
Mostly, but not all.
Because I guess my question is, have you had any contact with any other races, like, for example, reptilian races, and where do they feature in with all of this, and how do they work into it?
I haven't had any contact with reptilian races. I've had contact with greys and various species of greys and mixtures of greys, as well as the mantis beings, and human-like, what you might refer to as Nordic human-like beings who are extraordinary and very long-limbed and very tall. But I think the greys are quite extraordinary in that they create versions of themselves all the time. There are many versions of greys, and in the initial chapters of my book I talk about the mixed species and how as a child I would sit in group circles in a playroom kind of situation on a craft, and I could tell who was a similar species to this one on the right and who looked completely different. So you would get variations of skin tone and skin coloring, skin patterning, texture, facial and skull formation looking different. You get different eyes, etc., different shape of the slit here, different kind of tiny nose, in some visible, in others not very visible. So there were a lot of variations. But in my second book that I'm partway through writing, I will be talking about the hybrids. And unfortunately for me, perhaps, my experiences of the hybrids differ somewhat from those versions that have been put out by a number of researchers. The hybrids that I'm talking about are the ones on the craft that are being produced to have contact with us eventually, open contact, not the kind of hybrids that some experiences are talking about who are here on the planet, etc. This is a very different echelon of genetic engineering.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Suzy?
Yes, I can, thanks.
I was going to talk about spiritual growth, whether it's going to come from the young ones that are being born now, or be a result of trauma that happens in our society, or the people that get a voice that are already aware at the moment.
Could you just repeat the first line?
Right. I said about spiritual growth, how's it going to evolve? Is it going to be through the young ones that are coming up, the star children, or is it going to be something trauma that happens on Earth, or people are going to be more vocal that have already got that within their spirit?
Okay, thanks. Well, firstly, I just want to make a comment about star children. This is a bit of a sticking point for me as an experiencer, because I think there have been some researchers who have made this their catch cry or their catchphrase, the star kids, etc. In the 3 waves of souls incarnating on a planet that I describe in my book, what we term the star kids are actually only a very small part of that. They are still coming into the planet, and they're here to exhibit certain talents and that we have that have diminished in our societies over the years. And they're kind of free spirits who work in generally, often in music and art and the environment and areas of society like that. But they are not the be all and end all, and they are actually not the ones who are going to be making the big changes in the future. That's the 3rd wave that I talk about, and that is the children born to experiencers, abductees, contactees. And there's a vast difference, and I don't have the time to go into that now, but if you read my book, you will see how I separate these out and discuss this. In terms of spirituality, well, we are all individual souls, and we're all here for a purpose. And history has shown time and time again that there's a terrific spiritual upsurge when through tragedy. Now, that seems incredibly unnecessary that a species like ourselves should have to go through tragedy for people often to change, and some to change for the better. But I don't know what it is about our humanity, but history tells us that when the chips are down, many of us rise to the occasion. And if we look at the wars that have happened, say the Second World War, and looking at Britain, for example, being bombed by the Germans, destroying London, and how people worked together and became one and became unified in order to survive and in order to protect themselves and their families and their country. So through tragedy and adversity, we often grow, put it that way. Why it should have to be, I don't know. But for humanity on a global scale to experience that kind of growth in a short space of time, either something has to happen that is so inspiring to us, so absolutely awe-inspiring and so different that we rise to the occasion, that we become better people because of our contact with this. Or we go through absolute hell globally, and it forces us to analyze, change, rise to the occasion to survive and assist each other. So how is this spirituality going to come about, this rise? Well, firstly, the realization through compassion and need and awareness that we're destroying our planet, and sooner or later we won't have a livable planet. We know that we're now on a roller coaster and a downward slide with climate change. We're getting more severe weather, more severe floods. Just last week, the whole of the South Island was cut in half by flooding. It's never happened before. Right across the South Island, the bottom half was basically separated from the top half because of the flooding. Bridges were down, landslides, huge landslides, whole hills collapsing, roads closed, bottom of the South Island cut off, just like that. If you imagine this much worse on a global scale, then either we rise to the occasion and we look after each other, or we perish. So really there are, through our own actions as a civilization, we have slowly eroded and destroyed many of the things that could have made us a better civilization. We take every opportunity to take power, take control over others, to exclude, to cover things up, to be dishonest. And I'm not talking about everybody. I'm sure you people aren't like that. But if we look at generalization of humanity, this is how we operate. You only need to look at the wars going on around the planet at this time. So either we're going to have an awe-inspiring contact with something that could be ETs, where our existence is threatened by them swamping us because we're so minuscule compared to them, or we have tragedy and we learn to survive and live a better way. There might be some other examples, other ways, but I can't really think of any at the moment. Not looking around the world as it is at present. So it's quite depressing, isn't it?
Just a
Any
tad.
more questions?
Okay, we've got another question here.
Hi. Can you articulate what happened the moment that you were in your physical world and then you found yourself in that craft? Did you ever understand what happened between that exchange and then when you came out? Did you ever think at it?
So do you mean how I get from here to the craft? Is that what you mean?
Well, at the moment, you must have been walking somewhere or sitting down or something. And then the craft, you were in the craft. did you understand the process that you went from your physical world as a human?
Well, it's been, yes, okay, thank you. That's an interesting question because there's several answers to that one. I'll try to keep it brief and succinct. There are a number of ways that you can be taken on board a craft. So if you're physically taken on board a craft, you know, you see the classic photo of a UFO coming over someone and zooming them up in a light. Yes, that happens. That has happened to me, and I do have conscious memory of that. I recall being taken through a glass door, a ranch slider, and there were ETs, and two of them in front of me and one coming behind me, and he was floating me. So he, with his mind, had levitated me off the ground so that they could move me quickly and efficiently, because time factor is very relevant in all of these contacts. They have a reason for taking you on board, and they have a time limit, and they've got to get it done. So sometimes it's easier to put you into an altered state and float you. On this occasion, he floated me through the glass. Now, as I was going through the glass, and this has happened to me a number of times, there was a moment of blackness as you pass through. Whether that happens for them or not, I don't know, but there was just this moment of blackness, nothing, and then you're out the other side of it. So that's one way, and then taken up in a beam of light. That retracts, so it's a trapdoor beam, it retracts upwards. It has a finite bottom of it on it. It's not like the lights that you've got in the room there that glow and shine out. It has a flat bottom. I don't know if we can create a light like that, but it basically retracts up into the craft, taking you with it. On other occasions, many experiencers, including myself, are taken on board in spirit form or soul form, if I can put it that way. So you become a ball of light. And I'm sure many of us, or all of us, do this at night when we leave our body on occasions to go into the spirit realms. So you leave as a ball of light, you travel to the craft. I have actually memory of being able to see everything perfectly, even though I didn't have eyes, I had consciousness. So I'm a ball of light and I don't have physical eyes, but I can see everything around me. And I can recall going through two walls, going through two empty rooms and the walls to get to where I knew I needed to be on a craft, because I'd been there many times before. I knew the layout, and I was going through those walls to get there instead of floating down the corridor and going down different corridors as I would if I was a physical body walking. So there are a number of ways that you can be taken on board craft. I've also been transferred. It was rather Star Trek-ish on this occasion. I didn't talk about it for years because I was scared people would think I was copying Star Trek. But a group of us were placed on a platform, and then we just disappeared. And we were transferred from one larger craft back to a smaller one to be taken somewhere. And don't ask me what happened to our body in the middle, but we were somehow or other disintegrated or transported. And once again, there's a moment of blackness, and then you find yourself somewhere else. And another perfect example of that is using the light elevator on board craft, which I write about quite extensively in my book. Takes you between floors on the craft, taught to use it from an early age. It acts on consciousness and thought. So you get into it, you think the symbol or the level that you want to go to, and you're there. And it's just a moment of blackness. You don't go up like you do in a glass elevator and you're looking out at the shopping centre below, seeing everything as you go past. It's nothing like that. It's just instantaneous. I don't know how they do that, and nor do I know what would happen if someone was wanting to come down while you're going up. These are things, this is physics here that I don't understand because I'm not a physicist or a scientist. But I have talked about a lot of these things with Dr. Rudy Schild, who contributed to my book. When I stayed with him in Cambridge near Boston, we spent hours talking about consciousness and how consciousness reacts and acts from a human perspective to all of these environments and activities on the craft. So in answer to your question, there's a number of ways that you can get on board a craft. I've also been taken on board in my car, and a round spherical object with tripod legs, somehow or other locked onto me like a magnet onto our car and lifted it up beside it. So the car appears to be floating, but it is somehow locked on and was taken up put in through an opening. So the spherical craft came up underneath a big triangular craft with my car here. And at that point in time, they got us right underneath the opening. Then the trapdoor beam from the craft comes down and takes over. This guy unlocks from you and swoops away to pick someone else up. And your car is tractor beamed up and into a large hangar. So there's multiple ways you can be taken on board a craft. And I could write 10 books about some of these things. In fact, I cut out 70,000 words from my first book. Otherwise, it would have been about this thick. I cut out 70,000 words that all related to stairs that lowered, tractor beams, different colors, different things that they did, different technology on a craft, how doors opened and shut, how they, what do I call it? How they got rid of bugs and germs as you came on board. So yeah, there's a great deal of information I have yet to express in written form. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, she can now. Can you hear me, Sheryl?
Yeah, I can hear you, Marie.
Good eye. We just get Suzy up and we'll be bombs up. That coming from a New Zealander.
Work with all Kiwis on it. Oh, she's back.
Oh, here she is. Okay. You ready to go? Okay. Suzy, could you open, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for inviting me to speak, Marie. And I thought this would be a great opportunity for Sheryl and I to talk to you about a organisation that we are now a part of. It's a global organisation called ISAR, which stands for the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research. And our byline, and we have a byline which Sheryl's going to talk about in a minute, actually. Now, I've been in this organisation for just over a year, right from the beginning. And we're going to take you through and just describe what this organisation is all about and what we're going to be doing. We're going to roughly take turns at doing that. We've sorted out who's going to say what, and so we can convey the information to you. It's a very unique organisation, and you'll find out why shortly. So just to get the ball rolling, it's now headquartered, has been registered in Porto, Portugal. So it comes under European Union rules. So we are now a proper entity. That happened just recently, and we've been going through a year of working groups and setups, etc., to get this organisation up and running for global research and in preparation for preparing for contact. So I'm the New Zealand representative, and my deputy is Tim Mill. He's part of UFocus NZ, has been with us for about 5 years. I'm also Australasian Continental Director and work closely with Sheryl and her deputy. And I'm on the executive board for a term of 3 years, and then we all go off, or some of us go off, and more come on to gain that experience of working in the group. So I'm going to pass over to Sheryl now to introduce herself and her deputy.
Oh, thanks, Suzy. Yes, I got involved with ISAR last year, and the Australian representative, and my deputy is Ben Hurl, who is the president of the Victorian UFO Action Group in East Gippsland in Victoria. And Suzy and I have been on many Zooms very early in the morning for these international meetings. But what we thought we'd do is I'll talk to you about a bit of the history of ISA so you can understand where it came from and why we're here talking to you today about it. So 3 years ago, Italian UFO researcher Roberto Pinotti and US researcher Don Schmidt, who you're probably more familiar with, they were invited to China by a Chinese group run by someone called Jin Fin, with the suggestion of a coalition of an internationally recognised UFO researchers to form an organisation on extraterrestrial matters and the pursuit of world disclosure. And this idea became known as the Chinese Initiative on Disclosure. And there was going to be money provided by the Chinese groups. So Roberto and Don began to approach prominent researchers from around the world with a view to inviting them to attend a conference in Moscow during October 2018. And it was to be a joint conference organised by the Chinese with Russia co-hosting it. So the conference was called the Five Continents Forum, which took place over 3 days in mid-October 2018. And over the 3 days, a series of discussions took place between the leader of the Chinese group and the attending researchers, who were Roberto Pinotti from Italy and Don Schmidt, Gary Heseltine from the UK, Ademir Javard from Brazil, who some of you may have heard of, Gabor Takali from Hungary, Hakdan Aktigan from Turkey, Anthony Choi from Peru, Lakazar Filipov from Bulgaria, and Andrea Simondini from Argentina. You can see it's that's just that group who attended that particular forum, but it has since grown to 27 people, with some of those people having left for various reasons. So the central objective of the discussions at that time was to officially request the United Nations reopen the initiative which was originally proposed by Grenada in 1979, which is to investigate UFOs on a global level, and then take it to the United Nations, which is still the aim. So, but eventually the Chinese group dropped out, but the concept of a truly international coalition of UFO researchers remained appealing. So of most note to come out of those discussions, though, was that all delegates should sign an oath of allegiance to the organisation. And the oath would state that each delegate accepted that the UFO phenomenon was real and that we are dealing with an extraterrestrial non-human intelligence. Not an easy ask, because as we all know, different researchers have different opinions about what part of the UFO phenomenon is real, what isn't, what, as Suzy was mentioning before, what's accurate and what's not. But Gary Heseltine and Roberto Pinotti and the rest of us have signed, including Suzy, Ben and myself, we've all signed that oath, as have all the members of ISA. And this oath is now the bond that binds us together to achieve something that has never been done in UFO history. And that is to create a genuine worldwide international coalition of like-minded researchers, which is what we are today. So, and I think that shouldn't be underestimated because of the, as I've come to understand, the caliber of the people involved are, there are good people with knowledge, they've been educated, not that that's always a requirement, but they've spent many years in the UFO field. So some of them are scientists and academics who've joined. One of them is Professor Lakazar Filipov, who was Bulgaria's national representative, who is, I should say, and he's the space astrophysicist who supervised the training of their first astronauts. And another one is Dr. Eamon Ansborough, who's the national representative for the Republic of Ireland. And he's an astronomer who's set to feature in a book with Harvard professor Avi Loeb, due to release in late 2021. So that's where we're at. We're a group of 27 individuals who've decided it's time to band together and to do something on a worldwide scale.
Okay, so now let's have a look at the byline for ISA, which is preparing for contact. Both Sheryl and I have been working towards this for a very long time. And I remember in the early 2000s, Sheryl gave a brilliant speech in Australia that at a conference I was attending. I can't remember, Sheryl, whether it was Sydney or Brisbane, but it was about this very thing of preparing for contact. And you need to go through your files and find it, Sheryl, so we can print it. But perhaps you'd like to comment now on your perspective on preparing for contact.
Sure. And preparing for contact is a conversation that I've been waiting 33 years to have. And that's probably because the UFO community really has no idea where to start with it. Even though the modern era of UFO research is rich with reports of alien contact, some of those with humans, there's been no excuse as to why we've had decades to talk about contact, but we actually haven't really done it on a general scale within the UFO community. So, as you know, some of the reports by witnesses contain descriptions of aliens who are human-looking, so that it would be difficult to distinguish them from regular human beings. So that begs the question, has ET been here all along, right under our nose? Could it be that they're walking down the street, rubbing shoulders with us in the workplace or at social gatherings, sitting next to us on the bus, or even attending UFO meetings without our knowledge? And according to some witnesses, the answer is yes. So you can see what a can of worms the preparing for contact conversation opens up. And it's a big conversation. But if it's inevitable that we make, let's say, open contact with extraterrestrial cultures, then we must start having that conversation. We need to do the work and be prepared for that contact as best we can. Now, what I see right now as the role of UFO organisations is to increase the level of education of the public and the media about the UFO phenomenon. And we need to look at strategies of how to do that, which is what ISA is looking at right now, to increase that, to educate the public and the media better than perhaps what has occurred in the past. Now, collectively, humankind may not be ready for contact, but and I'm talking about open contact here, but which is what this will all lead to, I imagine, in the future. But there are those among us who want this, and we're willing to work towards it. So I think it's very important that we encourage and support witnesses to report their experiences, and at the same time diffuse the stigma surrounding the phenomenon. That has to be downplayed, and it goes hand in hand with increased education of the public. And basically, to do that, we have to lift our game.
Yeah, very well said, Sheryl. And the other thing is that I agree with Sheryl that we need to be encouraging people to talk about their contact experiences. But it's very interesting that when I facilitated a experiences session for 3 days in a row at the Congress in the USA, it was interesting that I did things a bit differently. It wasn't just people standing up and saying, telling about some of their experiences. I thought, well, we've been doing that for years. Almost every UFO conference, you have an experiencer session or experiencer day, and we all talk about our contact, and we don't move forward any further than that. So I decided, well, let's try to move this along a bit. And so I posed questions to them and put them into discussion groups to try and think about this issue of preparing for contact. And do you know, most of them had not thought about this at all. They were so fixed on their own experiences and listening to other people describe their experiences that they had not looked any further than that the reality may come one day where we share our world even with species from out in the galaxy. And so the idea of future contact just wasn't even on their radar. And I was quite astonished about that, because Sheryl and I have sort of been banging on about this for quite a long time. So ISA is going to prepare for contact, or prepare the public in a variety of ways, which I will outline in a minute. But first of all, Cheryl's going to explain to you, why is this just another UFO organization, or is this something unique?
Yes. First of all, let me just say what ISA is not. It is not a UFO reporting centre. we are not receiving reports from the public, although I'm sure that that will trickle through. But the idea is that we gather the best evidential information that we can and make that freely available to the public and to academics and scientists and anyone who wants to work with us. Also, I'm guessing that you would have heard that statement by Margaret Mead that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, and indeed it's the only thing that ever has. So now we have an international group of 27 committed people, numbers are growing, working together towards that goal. It's never been done before. So we don't really know what we can actually achieve until we try. But Suzy's going to talk to you now about the mission and the values and the goals of ISA, so you can understand where we're headed.
Yes, I'll have to use my notes for that. Discussion on this began a year ago. I think I joined ISA a little bit before Sheryl, and we set up with a temporary executive board to enable the setup, and we then set up the first working group, which I was on, and we met for nearly a year, ploughing through a great deal of information and coming up with long lists of suggestions, even for the name of ISA and the byline of ISA, everything right down to what was going to be our vision and our mission statement, etc. So I'm just going to read a few things to you. Our vision statement is: for planet Earth's harmony, living in conscious harmony with cosmic intelligences. So that takes us right forward into the future. That's our vision into the future that will happen, hopefully, for planet Earth one day. But as I said in my speech, living in conscious harmony with cosmic intelligences, first of all, we have to help the public learn about this subject. As Sheryl said, there's a huge stigma surrounding it, and there's a massive task ahead of ISA and other groups, and groups like U4 and UFO and UFocus NZ, in helping to disintegrate that stigma. But it will come slowly, especially with what's trickling out of the States at the moment. The object of the group is to study and research data about extraterrestrial life in all its aspects and inform the public about its findings, organise and promote events and courses about this topic. So that covers quite a lot of ground. That's just the objective of the association or the coalition. But we're not saying we're the be-all and end-all. We're saying that we're going to gather and archive information that's eventually going to be available to the public, and that we will be putting a great deal of effort into programs in long-term plans that enable the public to understand the subject better. And that will be right throughout all spheres of education, etc. There's a huge amount of work ahead of ISA now. And as Sheryl said, everybody is very committed to the task. So ISA wants to position itself as a reference point for all things extraterrestrial. So as Sheryl said, we're not a sighting gathering group. We are a true research group. So we will be gathering information from a whole variety of sources that assist in organising these familiarisation programs for the public, but not only for the public, but for science and the media, as Sheryl said, and for all age groups, ranging from school children through to youth, young adults, and the rest of the public. And our other positioning is to be an international UAP researcher's voice. So in other words, to give voice to research into the subject. Often this is in various countries is put on the back burner, it's taboo, it's not to be talked about. And we have already found within ISA the cultural differences and the cultural difficulties that exist between our different countries, and everybody is cooperating and collaborating to work towards enabling those countries where there is not such a good reception to the subject to find ways to get around that and to motivate the representatives and assist them to be able to inform their public. So our proposed mission process is first familiarisation, so setting up these programs to familiarise people with the reality and with the future potential for contact. Lobbying, which will be governments, will be MODs, DODs, scientists, business, big business, corporations, all of that kind of thing, education systems, universities. So we'll be lobbying all of those groups and hopefully being able to, in the future, put education programs into some of those institutions. Our number one area will be research, of course, and much of that research will become available to the public. But there's also room for experiment. So we have some scientists on board at the moment, and I can't mention what they're up to, but I can intimate that they are developing systems and technology that will assist in tracking UFOs, for example, and being able to experiment and test some things to do with consciousness and to do with technology. And then relations, setting up relations and relationships, not only with groups around the world and governments and aiming to go to the United Nations, but also preparing for relations with extraterrestrial species. And we're going to go through this through a whole variety of means, which we are about to embark on. There is a working group about to start work, which will involve most of the delegates to be on that working group, developing short-term, medium-term, and long-term policies and means of forward planning for ISA and for the education and familiarisation of the public. And our values or code of ethics is that it has been set up to provide specific guidance to its members as to the moral aspects and implications of activities. We are going to collaborate with certain groups but remain independent because, as Gary Heseltine has said, ISA is ISA, and you know, sometimes it's not a good thing to line yourself up with another group. Sometimes it's very good to remain independent. In that way, the public is more likely to view you as objective and a watchdog. We aim to show open-mindedness. We are a truth-oriented group, scientifically oriented, and respecting cultural aspects. We are aiming for openness for the public. We are non-profit, and of course, we support non-violence. So the working group starting up will be going down those tracks, dividing into groups and coming up with all kinds of initiatives and think tank initiatives that will come into reality in the future. Okay, must be your turn now, Sheryl.
Just to wind things up. I mean, this sounds like a grand plan, but it's actually not. We're starting where we are right now. The launch only last week, the week before. We're only days old. But this is you have to always have a goal of where you're headed to start on that journey. So and just speaking of the launch, we launched on I think it was the 25th of May, and all representatives worldwide sent out press releases. And it was a bit slow to start off, but the media is responding now and picking up the stories, running with letting people know that ISA exists. There have been a lot of things that have happened in May in regard to the UFO phenomenon, the media paying attention, the videos being that Jeremy Corbell has been dropping, and a whole host of things. But you can stay up to date with what ISA is doing by going to the website, and there's a Facebook page as well. And anyone in Australia and New Zealand are welcome to contact Suzy and I, and with anything that you want to talk about in relation to this, anything that you hear that you think that doesn't sound like what they said. So, you know, if you want to have something clarified, feel free to do that. But in my case, and I'm sure in Suzy's case, these press releases will be ongoing. There will be more sent out after the 25th of June with the report that is going to be presented. We'll have to take it by there. We will be running on our feet and adapting to as things progress, but we will be doing our best, and that's all any of us can do. And hopefully we'll stay on course. I'm sure we will. We'll be kept on course and to achieve some of these goals, at least in our lifetime.
Yeah. And I just want to add, to finish off, add something to what Sheryl said. She said that ISA has got very good people in it. And I can definitely back that up. You know, working on the committees with some of these people, they're scientists and academics, but and I'm just a school teacher, but in no way do you feel that there's any barrier at all. And everybody is very, very good people and hardworking and have been in the subject a very long time, as Sheryl and I have. I've been in it 46 years. I think Sheryl's pretty similar. And so, you know, there's this huge commitment from people who've been stuck to it and been in it a very long time. And I have every hope that ISA will achieve many of its objectives. And just a quick word about the media in Australia and New Zealand. It's difficult. The press releases didn't launch well here, and we didn't expect that they would. So Sheryl and I we conjured up with Ben our own plan for how we're going to go about things in this part of the world, and it is working at the moment because we've both been able to get into the media a bit, and even if it's just pushing our own organisation, then getting the opportunity to speak on radio or in a newspaper, we will eventually be able to bring ISA into this and make people aware that this is available. So it's www.isa.network. You can go to the website, which is still being constructed, and have a look at some of the delegates and what we're up to. And that's about it, really. If anyone's got any questions about it, that's fine. And if not, then we'll hand it back to Marie. Thank you.
Okay, any questions?
Sheryl, Horace here. Hi, Sheryl, Horace here.
Oh, hi, Horace.
Probably can't see me. You know, I think it's a wonderful idea what you're doing. It's perfect timing and all that. I'm going to say something, but you're just getting started, constructive and a little bit. However, when I heard that, I thought that's a wonderful idea. However, ISA really doesn't catch my imagination. That acronym, what is it, international? What does it stand for?
Just can't quite hear you.
What does ISA stand for again? The acronym.
International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research.
I think that's wonderful, but it's not catchy maybe with the media. I think you need, not being critical, but it'd be good to get something a little catchier than that to catch the media, and people might have a good idea. So I would just like to suggest while it's early stages, like I make names for products and things like that. You have to say, what are we going to do to make people buy this? What are we going to call it? So I think a catchy name might cosmetically go away at this early stage. That's all I'm going to suggest. I'm not going to suggest what name it is. So
I can answer that, Horace. Being on the working group that actually worked on the name, the meetings on the name alone went on and on and on because we had to consider a huge amount of perspectives and that stigma that exists out there. So we didn't consider that we chose a safe name. It might be quite a standard sort of a name. I think I came up with 21 catchy names that may have been okay. And at first, the rest of the committee was very enthusiastic about some of them, but slowly everything got whittled away, meeting after meeting on just the name alone. And we decided on this one. It was voted on and selected because it has the most leeway. It is not way out and fruity. It is quite formal sounding, but it has that all-important word extraterrestrial in there when so many other groups are using UFO or UAP. So we put extraterrestrial in there because we're about preparing for contact, and that's our byline that always goes with ISA's name. And I'm really quite pleased that that name was chosen. At first, I didn't like it at all. I thought we could have done something more creative, but for a whole variety of reasons, I now feel quite comfortable with that name.
Okay, I'm going to go second time. I know it's very important we're going to get it. I'm talking around to people here. How about extraterrestrial education as the name for it? Something to really catch stuff. What does Marie think?
I think it's too late to change the name. If they spend a year deciding it, I think it's just too late. But anyway, nice try, Horace. Nice
Thank you anyway, Horace.
Yes,
Think about it.
feedback is always good.
Okay, any other questions? No, no. Okay, well, I think just one moment.
Could you please put the website name on your screen so we can write it down? We just can't get the.
Yeah,
Just say it again, and I'll
it's www.icer.network.
Oh, yeah, I got it. I can memorise that, believe it or not. New Zealander and all. Okay. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up. And I just want to say that you did a wonderful speech, Suzy. And in the break, everybody was just coming up to me and saying how much they enjoyed it. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me to speak, Marie and committee. I love talking to you four. I love talking to you, Hawke. It's like a second home for me because over here in New Zealand, it's just me on my own, basically, with the guys who are in UFocus NZ, and there's no opportunities to talk anywhere over here. So it's always great, and I always think of ISA, of UFOC and U4 as my second families and third families. Thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. Okay, and thank you too, Sheryl, for joining us. And I think the new venture sounds really wonderful, and we look forward to hearing more about it. And if there's any way that we can help, we'd be happy to do so, of course.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah.
Okay. Bye, girls.
Okay, bye.